Hi. The consequences of leaving Jehovah's Witnesses varies from family to family. A lot depends on the strictness of the family in keeping Watchtower rules, and even the reasons for leaving can alter the treatment one receives. When the Watchtower had a period of time where disfellowship members were treated less severely, Jehovah's Witnesses treated disfellowship members less severely. But now that the Watchtower demands severity, they follow suit. It is ironic that those who leave for reasons of disagreement theologically with the Watchtower on any issue are shunned and slandered. It is not conceivable to Jehovah's Witnesses that the Watchtower could be wrong, or that one's conscience should be followed over Watchtower dictates. The same scriptures about a blatantly, scandalously immoral person or one who rejects God and Christ are applied to such ones. David and I have heard reports of witnesses married to so-called apostates being encouraged to separate from and divorce their mates for safety against spiritual contamination or spiritual adultery. Let us know if you have come across this, and especially if you have read such advice in Watchtower publications. In the rank and file Jehovah's Witnesses that we have met, we have heard such thinking. In the last months of my attending the meetings, I experienced being avoided after David no longer was attending the meetings. And I heard speculation and assumptions that David might be mistreating me. Apparently, they believe that anyone who stops going to the meetings turns into a bad person. But are there any New Testament texts that counsel witnesses to separate from their mates, shun their parents, grandparents, or children for leaving the flock? You would expect some examples if this was the practice of the early Christians. Bergman relates one experience of a person leaving the Witnesses with really horrific results. This is the story of Jim Kostelniuk, and I'm sorry if I pronounced the name wrong. In 1978, Jim Kostelniuk became, because of personal dissatisfaction, left Watchtower Society and consequently was disfellowshipped, which resulted in the breakup of his marriage. His wife, following the teachings of the Watchtower, adamantly fought her husband's right to visit their 2 children. She eventually remarried another member of the sect. In 1985, Kostelniuk, his former wife, and both his children were murdered by the second husband. At the witness funeral, Jim was treated as an invisible person. He was neither spoken to or mentioned in the funeral sermon, nor offered any comfort by the witnesses present. You can read this account in the Winnipeg Free Press, Tuesday, February the 10th, 1987. That is a very sad story. And what part did the Watchtower play in this, in her feeling that she had to leave her husband, or the disfellowshipping causing the breakup of the family? What is the only allowance that Jesus gave for divorce? We read in Matthew 5, verse 32. Jesus says, "Whoever divorces his wife for any reason except sexual immorality causes her to commit adultery. And whoever marries a woman who is divorced commits adultery. Again, in Matthew 19, verses 5 and 9, talking about marriage and divorce, Jesus says, "For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh," quoting from Genesis. Then he says, "Whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery, and whoever marries her who is divorced commits adultery." What about the New Testament? What kind of counsel was the church giving to its congregation? Romans 7, verses 2 and 3. It says, "A woman who has a husband is bound by the law to her husband as long as he lives. But if the husband dies, she is released from the law of her husband. So then, if while her husband lives she marries another man, she will be called an adulteress. But if her husband dies, she is free from that law, so that she is no longer an adulteress, though she has married another man." And then also in 1 Corinthians 7, we read a good portion of that in the previous video about Dudley. But in verse 39 it says, "A wife is bound by law as long as her husband lives. But if her husband dies, she is at liberty to be married to whomever she wishes in the Lord." I would have to say a religion is made in the image of their God. The Watchtower's God is not the covenant-keeping God of the Bible, who makes unconditional promises. Their God is more like a contract employer. They do not require loyalty to marriage vows. Those are dispensable, dissolvable, if one is not loyal to JW.org. I'm going to link to two videos. One is based on the Matthew 19 text covered in our discussion of J.C. Ryle's verse-by-verse exposition of the Bible. So on Matthew 19, 1-15, it was called "What God Has Joined Together." Marriage should mirror God's faithfulness and covenant commitment. The second video is one that David and I were discussing, Yahweh's everlasting love versus JW.org's conditional contract based on Jeremiah 31.